Hello everyone, I am the storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax.
Harbinger's Hollow is a tiny, forgotten village with a haunting story. On the edge of the village, the house on Blackthorn Road stands like a ghost in time. Locals avoid the place, saying it is the center of tragedy that stretches back more than a century. The house once belonged to the Crown family, a wealthy but isolated clan. On a cold winter night in 1893, the entire family disappeared without a trace. No one knows what happened, but the house has been the center of creepy rumors ever since. Emma Langley, a documentary filmmaker known for her horror films, has chosen the house as the subject of her next project. For Emma, Harbinger's Hollow is a golden opportunity, but for the villagers, it is an invitation to disaster. "You shouldn't go there," warns Martha Gibson, the owner of the village's only restaurant. "That house isn't just haunted, it holds the devil's hand." Emma, as usual, ignored the warning. Her team consisted of Josh, the cameraman, Clara, the intern, Marcus, the sound guy, and Elise, the paranormal investigator. Little did they know that this trip would change their lives forever. The first night at the house, the atmosphere immediately becomes oppressive. Shadows seem to dance at the edges of vision, and the wind whistling through the windows sounds like a whisper. As the group begins filming, the strange phenomena quickly increase. "It's just the creaking of the old house," Josh says, trying to reassure everyone. But his skepticism is quickly shaken when he spots a figure flitting across the camera screen. Elise, magnetometer in hand, declares firmly, "There's something here, something that doesn't want us here." Despite the strangeness, Emma is determined to push on. "This is what we need to get attention," she says. But deep down, Emma can't deny the feeling that the house is looking back at them. The next day, Emma and Elise go to the village's small library to learn more about the Crown family. Old documents reveal that the Crowns once performed mystical rituals to communicate with an entity known as the Whisperer beyond the Veil. "They weren't just looking for power," Elise explains. "They were trying to open a door between this world and the other." As night fell, the group returned to the house. They decided to explore the basement, which Elise believed was the center of the rituals. In the dim light, they found a passageway leading down to an ancient underground chamber. Beneath, they found strange symbols carved into the walls and a charred stone altar in the center of the room. The air here was cold, as if death had eaten into the very stones. "We shouldn't be here," Marcus said, his voice trembling. But before anyone could react, the bunker door slammed shut, trapping them in total darkness. From there, things began to spiral out of control. In the darkness, the whispers became clearer, turning into authoritative voices, calling out each person's name. Josh tried to film, but his camera suddenly fell from his hand. "Something just touched me," he said, breathing heavily. Shadows began to appear on the walls, contorted shapes with glowing eyes. Clara screamed as she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. "Don't panic," Elise shouted, but her voice was drowned out by the roar that echoed from deep within the darkness. A huge, shadow-like entity slowly emerged from the wall. Its glowing red eyes glared directly at the group. "It's the Whisperer," Elise whispered, her face pale. "It's been summoned." One by one, Emma's team was torn apart. Josh was pulled into the darkness by an invisible hand. Marcus screamed before disappearing through the wall, leaving only an empty echo. Emma and Elise tried to escape the room, but all exits were blocked. "We have to find a way to close the door," Elise said, her eyes fixed on the altar. But before they could do anything, the Whisperer lunged at Elise. Her screams echoed through the room, then abruptly stopped. Emma, now alone, desperately tried to find a way out. Somehow, she felt herself being pulled toward the altar. The symbols on it began to glow, and the whispering in her head became unbearable. Finally, in the final moment, Emma felt her body being pulled, and when she opened her eyes, she was outside the house, in the morning sunlight. Emma is found in the woods by villagers. No one believes her story, and none of her group is ever found. The local police try to investigate, but the house seems to resist any intervention. When Emma returns to life, she discovers strange signs following her. Dreams of the whisperer, shadows in the corners of her eyes, and whispers when she is alone. Emma's story quickly spreads through the media, and the house on Blackthorn Road becomes a national phenomenon. But for Emma, this is not a story to tell. It is a warning. There are doors that should never be opened. Harbinger's Hollow wasn't on most maps. It was a town you stumbled upon when you were already lost, tucked deep into the Appalachian wilderness, where the mountains whispered secrets to those who dared listen. Emma Walsh hadn't planned to find it. A veteran podcaster specializing in unsolved mysteries, she had been chasing a cold lead about a missing family when her GPS led her astray. By the time she realized the mistake, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the winding dirt roads. The hollow seemed frozen in time. Quaint cottages with sagging porches lined the single main street, and the townsfolk peered at her with wary eyes as she pulled into the gas station. A hunched old man in overalls filled her tank, his movements slow and deliberate. "Stranger," he asked, his voice gravelly. "Just passing through," Emma replied, her tone chipper. "Though this place, it's fascinating. Ever hear of a family called the Crowns?" The man froze, his gaze sharpening. "Why would you ask that?" "I've been following their story. Disappeared in the 1800s, right? Big house on Blackthorn Road?" The man's face darkened. "Ain't no good comes from talking about that house," he said, his voice low. "Folks round here know better. You should too." But Emma couldn't help herself. Mystery was her lifeblood, and the mention of the house sparked her curiosity like a match to dry tinder. That night, Emma booked a room in the Hollow's only inn, a creaky, dimly lit place that smelled faintly of damp wood and old tobacco. As she reviewed her notes about the Crown family, she noticed a pattern she hadn't seen before. The disappearances in Harbinger's Hollow didn't stop with the Crowns. Every 25 years, another family or group of people went missing, always without a trace. In 1918, it was a group of loggers. In 1943, a family of 5. In 1968, for college students. And now, she realized with a shiver, 2023 marked another quarter century. The innkeeper, a kindly woman named Betty, brought her a cup of tea and hesitated by the door. "You're not planning to visit that house, are you? Why does everyone keep asking that?" Emma said with a nervous laugh. Betty's expression turned grim. "Because the house calls to people like you, and it doesn't let go." That night, Emma dreamed of the house. In her vision, it stood tall and imposing, its broken windows like watching eyes. A low hum emanated from within, and as she approached, the front door creaked open on its own. When she awoke, the image lingered in her mind, vivid and haunting. The next morning, Emma decided to investigate the house. Armed with her recording equipment and a flashlight, she made her way up Blackthorn Road. The townsfolk avoided her gaze as she passed, their silence louder than words. The house was worse than she imagined. Its facade was decayed, with ivy snaking up the cracked walls, and the air around it felt heavy, oppressive. A no trespassing sign hung crookedly on the rusted gate, but Emma ignored it. Inside, the air was damp and cold. Dust coated every surface, and the smell of mildew was almost overwhelming. Her footsteps echoed as she explored the decaying grandeur of the Crown estate. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, she found a journal, its leather cover cracked with age. The pages were filled with frantic handwriting, detailing strange occurrences. Shadows moving in the corners, whispers in the dead of night, and dreams of the Harbinger. As she read, Emma felt the temperature drop. Her breath misted in the air, and a faint whisper tickled her ear. She spun around, but the room was empty. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. The whisper came again, louder this time. It was a single word, chilling and deliberate. "Stay." Emma fled the house, her heart pounding. Back at the inn, she replayed the audio she'd recorded. The whisper was clear, but there was something else. An underlying hum, almost like chanting. Desperate for answers, she visited the town historian, an eccentric man named Gerald. He listened to her story with growing unease. "The Crowns were obsessed with the Harbinger," Gerald said, pulling a dusty tome from his shelf. "They believed it was a guardian spirit, something ancient that protected the Hollow. But over time, they realized it wasn't protecting, it was feeding." "Feeding on what?" "On us," Gerald said grimly. "The disappearances, the dreams, the whispers. It's all part of the cycle. Every 25 years, the Harbinger demands a sacrifice, and those who hear its call rarely escape." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The whisper haunted her, growing louder and more insistent. She dreamed of the house again, but this time, she wasn't alone. Shadows moved through the halls, their shapes shifting and unnatural. They reached for her with elongated fingers, and she awoke screaming. By morning, Emma knew she couldn't leave, not yet. The house had its hooks in her, and she needed to know why. She returned with Gerald, who reluctantly agreed to help her confront the Harbinger. In the basement, they discovered a hidden chamber. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and at the center of the room was a stone altar, darkened with old blood. "This is where it began," Gerald whispered. As they examined the room, the air grew thick with an unnatural energy. The symbols on the walls began to glow, and a deep, guttural voice filled the chamber. "You should not have come," it rumbled. The room plunged into chaos. The walls seemed to pulse, and shadows oozed from the cracks, forming into grotesque figures. Gerald screamed as one of the shadows enveloped him, dragging him into the darkness. Emma barely escaped, the whispers echoing in her ears as she stumbled back into the daylight. Emma fled the Hollow, but the Harbinger followed. No matter where she went, she felt its presence, watching, waiting. Her recordings were filled with static and whispers, and her dreams grew darker with each passing night. Desperate, she returned to the house one last time. Armed with the knowledge she'd gathered, she planned to confront the Harbinger and end the cycle. Inside the hidden chamber, she found the altar glowing with an otherworldly light. The Harbinger appeared, a massive, amorphous figure, its many eyes burning with malevolence. "You cannot stop this," it said, its voice resonating in her bones. The cycle must continue, but Emma was prepared. Using the symbols she'd studied, she began a counter-ritual, chanting words she barely understood. The Harbinger roared, its form writhing as the chamber trembled. With a final burst of energy, the Harbinger was banished, its form dissolving into nothingness. The house shuddered violently, then fell silent. Exhausted, Emma emerged into the dawn light. The weight of the Harbinger's presence finally lifted. Emma's story became a sensation. Her podcast series, Whispers of the Harbinger, captivated millions. But she knew the truth was far darker than she let on. Though the Harbinger was gone, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the cycle wasn't truly broken. Late at night, when the world was quiet, she still heard the whispers. And somewhere, deep in the Appalachian wilderness, the ruins of the house on Blackthorn Road waited for the next curious soul to step inside. On the outskirts of Denver, Colorado, hidden behind a sprawling forest of dead pines, stood the Hollow Grove Asylum. Once a state-of-the-art psychiatric hospital in the 1930s, it became infamous for its controversial treatments and unexplained patient disappearances. The asylum was abruptly abandoned in 1962, leaving behind only silence and stories of the patients who never made it out. For decades, Hollow Grove sat untouched, slowly crumbling under the weight of its dark history. But that all changed when an enigmatic billionaire, Martin Bellamy, announced a contest. 10 people would be selected to spend 1 week inside the asylum. The winner, chosen by public vote, would receive $1 million. The catch? They had to document their entire experience. No leaving, no contact with the outside world. The announcement went viral. Thousands applied, but only the most interesting contestants were chosen. Among them were Julie Parsons, a true crime podcaster eager to boost her following; Evan Reyes, a tech vlogger with a penchant for debunking paranormal myths; Dr. Sarah Morton, a clinical psychologist fascinated by the asylum's history; Connor Blake, a thrill-seeking influencer chasing his next adrenaline rush; Lila and Max Harper, siblings with a growing ghost hunting channel. On a crisp October morning, the group arrived at the asylum, each with their cameras and gear. The front gates creaked open, revealing the imposing facade of Hollow Grove. Its broken windows glared like eyes, and the scent of mildew and decay wafted through the air. Julie glanced at the others. "We're really doing this, huh?" Evan smirked. "It's just an old building. What's the worst that could happen?" The rules were simple. They were free to explore but had to stay within the asylum's grounds. Cameras had to be running at all times. Inside, the asylum was a decaying labyrinth of peeling paint, rusted gurneys, and crumbling walls. The group split up, eager to capture footage. Lila and Max focused on the patient records room, discovering chilling notes about the bleeding experiment, an unorthodox treatment that allegedly cured psychosis by draining patients of tainted blood. Meanwhile, Julie wandered into the electroshock therapy wing. Her camera caught faint whispers, though she heard nothing at the time. When she reviewed the footage later, a voice hissed, "Help me." Evan set up motion sensors in the main hall, determined to prove the contest was a hoax. "Ghosts aren't real," he said into his vlog camera, "but viral marketing is." Dr. Morton was drawn to the basement. She found old restraints and a surgical table stained with something dark. She muttered into her recorder, "The asylum wasn't just cruel, it was evil." Connor, always the showman, staged a fake scare in the morgue for his viewers. But as he lay on a gurney, pretending to be a patient, the heavy doors slammed shut. He laughed nervously, thinking it was a prank, but the others were nowhere near him. When the group reconvened in the central lobby, everyone had a story to share. But as the night deepened, the asylum seemed to awaken. Footsteps echoed from unseen sources, shadows moved against the flickering lights, and doors slammed without warning. "It's the wind," Evan insisted, but Julie wasn't so sure. By the second day, the group noticed something strange. The asylum seemed to shift. Hallways stretched longer than before, doors led to different rooms, and entire sections disappeared overnight. Max stumbled upon a room that wasn't on the blueprints. Its walls were covered in scribbled words. "He's coming. He's coming." In the center of the room was a rotting chair with leather straps. "Who's coming?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. Connor joked, "Probably Martin Bellamy with our $1 million." But the room's atmosphere was suffocating, and even he fell silent. That night, Julie dreamt of a man in a blood-soaked lab coat. He stood at the foot of her bed, his hollow eyes staring into hers. When she woke, her arms were marked with faint bruises in the shape of fingers. Dr. Morton began piecing together the asylum's darkest secret. In the 1950s, the head doctor, Elias Grayson, grew obsessed with the idea of immortality. He believed that extracting fear from patients could transfer their life force into him. The so-called bleeding experiment was part of this research. Grayson didn't just kill patients, Dr. Morton told the group. He consumed them. On the fourth night, everything unraveled. Evan's motion sensors caught a figure moving down a corridor, but when he checked, no one was there. His camera footage showed a tall, shadowy man with glowing eyes. Julie found Connor in the cafeteria, his face pale. "I saw him," Connor whispered. "The doctor. He's here." The group huddled together, fear dissolving their earlier bravado. Lila and Max suggested leaving, but the front gates were locked. Their phones, which had worked fine the day before, now displayed static. "It's the asylum," Dr. Morton said grimly. "It doesn't want us to leave." As the night wore on, the group began hearing voices. Some were cries for help, others were sinister whispers. The air grew colder, and the smell of decay intensified. When they entered the surgical wing, they found writing on the walls, freshly scrawled in what looked like blood. "One must stay." By the 6th day, the group was in disarray. Evan disappeared after investigating the morgue, his camera left behind, recording static. Lila swore she saw shadows pulling him into the walls. Julie confronted Dr. Morton. "You knew this would happen, didn't you? Why did you really come here?" Dr. Morton hesitated before admitting the truth. "The asylum doesn't let people go unless it gets what it wants. I've read accounts from survivors. One person has to be taken." Connor overheard and exploded in anger. "So what? We just pick someone to die?" As the argument escalated, the lights flickered and a deafening roar echoed through the asylum. The walls seemed to pulse, and the shadowy figure of Dr. Grayson appeared, his hollow eyes fixed on them. "He's choosing," Dr. Morton whispered. One by one, the group fled, but the asylum's shifting halls separated them. Julie found herself back in the lost room, where the scribbled warnings now glowed. The chair in the center beckoned, and Grayson's voice filled her head. "Stay, and they will be free." When the sun rose on the 7th day, only Julie emerged from the asylum. The gates opened on their own, and she stumbled into the forest, clutching her camera. The footage she submitted showed her final moments in the lost room. She sat in the chair, her face streaked with tears as she whispered, "I'm sorry." Then the camera cut to static. Though Julie survived, she was never the same. Her eyes were distant, and she refused to speak of what happened. But as the years passed, stories spread of shadowy figures seen near Hollow Grove and whispers of laughter in the wind. The asylum remained silent, waiting for the next invitation.
Thanks for listening to today's story. Let us know what you think. If you want to hear more scary stories, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode when we upload it. We'll always be here and welcome you.